Hi, my name's Amy, and my father called me his biggest failure in front of hundreds of people at his retirement gala. But what hurt more than his words was realizing everyone around him already believed it because they had helped erase me long before that night ever came. They cut me from the slideshow, left my name off the program, replaced my gift with someone else's. They rewrote the story without me. So I gave him a little box, and just one sentence that made the whole room freeze. But what was inside that box? And why did it change everything? The flight from Seattle touched down before sunrise, but the weight in my chest had been building long before the plane ever left the ground. Austin still smelled the same sun-baked concrete, mesquite smoke, and old guilt. The kind that lingers in the corners of your ribs even after years apart. I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 months. The silence wasn't unusual, it was the default. And yet, here I was, flying 2 states over just to sit quietly in the shadows of his retirement gala. Not for him. For me. The Driskill Hotel loomed with its grand stone columns and velvet accents like a southern monarch that refused to age. I stood in the lobby longer than I needed to, not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what this place represented, every room curated for pride, every detail a mirror to reflect back the version of him he wanted the world to see. I checked in under my own name. That would become ironic later. In my suite, I pulled the dress from its plastic cover, steam-pressed but simple. Not showy, not forgettable. I'd spent more time choosing the wrapping paper for the box tucked inside my carry-on than I had on what to wear. Navy blue, with a thin silver ribbon. Understated. Intentional. Inside was something small, something he had kept for over 2 decades. I wasn't here to make a speech. I wasn't even listed in the program as a guest of honor. And that was fine. Expected even. But part of me still hoped for something. Maybe just the dignity of being acknowledged. By the time I arrived at the ballroom, the space was already half full. Servers wove between tables like practiced dancers. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I approached the check-in desk. The young woman smiled politely. Name? Amy Colburn. She frowned at her list, finger scrolling, then tapping. Oh, you're... Maya Colburn? No, Amy. Another pause. You're at table 19. Table 19 was in the back, past the sponsors, past the engineers, even behind the local press. My place card had a typo Maya. The irony wasn't lost on me. I slid into the seat without protest. The linen napkin was already folded like a swan. A man in a beige jacket next to me leaned in. You with catering? I blinked. No. He chuckled, sipping his wine. Sorry. Thought you looked familiar. I didn't correct him. I'd grown used to being misfiled, misnamed, mislabeled. It was safer to stay quiet and let people build their own convenient narratives. The lights dimmed. The slideshow began. Large screens flickered to life above the stage, displaying a montage of Virgil Kessler's life in 30-second intervals. Childhood photos, teenage football trophies, wedding shots, boardroom triumphs. Then came the family section. Denton's military commendations, Callista's PR awards, their wedding, the birth of their daughter. More applause. Then more pictures, Virgil shaking hands with congressmen, giving keynote addresses, standing beside rocket prototypes. Not a single frame included me. Not my high school science award, not my college graduation, not my promotion to lead systems engineer. Not even the blurry photo from when I visited Mom in the hospital that one Thanksgiving. It was as if I'd never existed. Someone at the table whispered, "Didn't know Virgil only had 2 kids." Another replied, "Maybe she's like PR team or something?" I excused myself. The hallway outside was quiet, carpeted, heavy with the kind of insulation that kept power brokers' secrets from escaping. I leaned against the cool marble wall near the restroom and let the sting behind my eyes dissolve before it could turn into tears. I wasn't going to cry in a hallway, not for a man who hadn't asked about me in years. My phone buzzed. A message half-typed sat unsent. They didn't even get my name right. I considered sending it to my mother, then deleted it. In the mirror, I fixed my hair, smoothed my lipstick, and whispered to my reflection, "You came for you. Don't forget that." And I wouldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. When someone rewrites your history long enough, you start picking up the pen whether you're ready or not. The applause hadn't even faded when the ballroom lights dimmed again. A soft instrumental played, one of those nostalgic tracks that always suggested something profound was coming. I knew what came next. My father, Virgil Kessler, master of ceremony, hero of his own narrative, would take the stage. The room shifted in anticipation. Champagne glasses were straightened. Chairs scooted forward. Every eye turned toward the man who'd built both a defense company and his own myth from the ground up. He approached the podium like a general. I'd seen him command rooms before briefings with the Pentagon, investor summits, school fundraisers. But tonight, his gait was even more precise. His navy suit, tailored within an inch of arrogance, held every thread of his legacy together. He began with the expected a deep breath, a pause, and a smile perfectly rehearsed. "It's hard to believe it's been 42 years, he said. 42 years of building, leading, and learning. But none of it would mean a thing without family." The room warmed. People nodded. "Denton," he continued, turning toward my brother, "you've made me proud every step of the way. Your discipline, your service, your loyalty to the legacy." Applause followed. Denton raised his glass in a modest, controlled salute. He knew this script by heart. My stomach began to harden. I glanced toward my mother, sitting 5 tables over. Her eyes stayed fixed on her folded hands. "And to my daughter-in-law, Callista," Virgil went on, smiling directly at her. "You came into our lives and became the daughter I never had but always hoped for." There it was. The daughter I never had. Those words didn't just echo, they pierced, like a bell rung directly into my bones. Callista, perfectly composed, leaned into the praise like it was sunlight. She touched her chest, mouthed, "Thank you," as if she hadn't orchestrated her way into every family photo I was excluded from. Applause swelled again. Some guests stood to clap. The lighting caught the shimmer of her gown, the glass in her hand, the ring Virgil had insisted on gifting her personally after the wedding. I didn't move, not an inch. He wasn't finished. "Of course," he added, letting his voice drop to that folksy, faux humble tone he saved for impact. "Not every child chooses to follow the path. Some take different roads. And that's okay. Sometimes they're reminders of what doesn't work. They teach you what failure looks like." There wasn't laughter at first. Just an awkward pause. Then, a polite chuckle or two. The kind that floats through a room when people aren't sure if a joke is safe to laugh at. I didn't need to hear my name. Every nerve in my body recognized the outline of an insult dressed up as philosophy. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for my drink. I let the weight of the moment settle around me like fog. Denton glanced in my direction, then quickly away. Callista adjusted her necklace, pretending not to notice. And my mother, my mother, she still stared at her lap. The worst part wasn't the dig. The worst part was that no one flinched. A waiter appeared beside me with a fresh flute of champagne. I waved it off. He left it anyway. This was the moment most people would get up and leave. I didn't. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because walking out would have felt like conceding a game I didn't agree to play. So I stayed. I sat there through the closing remarks, through the final toast, through more laughter and praise and well-earned nostalgia that had no space carved out for me. As the lights brightened and the stage cleared, I heard someone at a nearby table murmur, "She's gotta be PR or something. No way she's family." I didn't look. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened a text to my best friend back in Seattle. He did it. Called me a failure. On stage. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. The navy blue box under my table brushed against my ankle. It had stayed there, untouched. Quiet. Just like me. I glanced toward the stage again. My father was shaking hands, smiling for photos, holding Callista's elbow like she was the prize at the end of a race I was never invited to run. This would be the last time I let him write my story. If you erase someone long enough, you start to believe they were never there, unless they start writing themselves back in. I stepped out into the corridor, while the gala buzzed on without me. The low hum of clinking glasses and muffled laughter faded as the thick hotel walls swallowed the noise. The carpet was soft beneath my heels, but the chill in the air conditioning seeped right through the silk of my dress. For a moment, I let myself lean against the cool marble, my eyes drifting over the tall ceilings and mahogany accents that reminded me of conference centers where my father used to speak. He loved a microphone, loved an audience even more. I'd grown up watching him dominate rooms like this, lecturing on leadership, innovation, legacy. Always that word, legacy. He'd say it like it was holy, like it needed to be protected, passed down, polished until it gleamed. But I had once stood on a stage of my own. That memory had waited quietly for years, and now it returned like a tide I couldn't stop. I was 28 when I got the letter. I'd been chosen to represent the U.S. in a multinational aerospace initiative. Only 10 scientists were selected nationwide, the kind of opportunity that builds careers, that changes lives. There was just one thing missing, a signature from an industry sponsor. And with my affiliation to Kessler Advanced, his company, Virgil, was the natural choice. My choice. I remember sitting across from him in his office. It still smelled like old wood and expensive ink. I handed him the form with a hopeful smile. He read it, paused, then handed it back without looking me in the eye. "I can't sign this," he said flatly. I blinked. Why not? If I sign off, it'll look like nepotism. Or worse, like I'm soft. You know how this works. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed around the words I'd wanted to shout. "You'll have other chances," he said, standing, already done with the conversation. But I didn't get another chance. That program only ran once, and I hadn't had another sponsor. Not one who could carry the same weight. That night, I sat in my Seattle apartment, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it felt too familiar, too expected to be shocked by it. What hurt more was realizing that I didn't even argue. I let it happen. I let him close the door. Now, years later, standing in that hallway with the sound of my own father celebrating the people he approved of, I understood something new. He hadn't feared nepotism. He feared me being seen. He feared that if I stood on a stage without him controlling the spotlight, people might realize there was another kind of brilliance in this family, one that didn't wear a uniform or bear his last name like a badge of loyalty. My entire life had been a silent choreography of stepping aside, staying in the frame, but never in focus. Every time I dared to step forward, someone would tug my sleeve with a reminder. Don't outshine your brother. Or worse, don't make your father uncomfortable. It wasn't humility. It was erasure disguised as virtue. I'd mistaken quiet for strength. But silence had never protected me. It only protected their illusion. I didn't know how long I stood there before the ballroom doors opened, and 2 guests stepped out, deep in conversation about some policy memo. I stepped aside politely, then made my way back upstairs. The hotel suite was too pristine, too artificial. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-open closet. The navy box was still in my bag, untouched, waiting. Just like me. I reached for the notepad on the desk and pulled the pen from the leather folio beside it. The pages were blank, inviting. At the top, I wrote, "What they took from me." Then I paused, letting the ink dry before I added the first line. 2009. Denied international representation. Reason, inconvenient success. I used to think staying quiet was loyalty. Now I see it was permission. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, robe knotted around my waist, steam curling out of the hotel coffee cup beside me. On the table lay the updated event program that had been slid under my door sometime in the night. I flipped it open, more out of habit than curiosity. My name wasn't there. Page 6, Voices of the Next Generation. A segment meant to showcase the family's continuing legacy. Originally, I had been invited to speak for 3 minutes. A brief reflection, nothing formal. Now, that space belonged to my brother, Denton Jr., once again cast as the rightful heir. I didn't feel rage. Not immediately. Just that sharp, cold pressure in my chest. The same kind you get when someone slams a car door too hard near your ear. Sudden, stunning, loud, even in its silence. There was no note, no explanation. But the ink on the program was fresh, the decision clearly made after the gala's first half. I dressed slowly. Gray dress, minimal jewelry. The box stayed in my luggage, still sealed, still waiting. By noon, I made my way to the event planning table near the lobby. A young woman smiled from behind a laptop. "Hi, I had a question about the program update. I noticed my segment is no longer listed," she typed, eyes scanning the screen. "Oh, yes. I believe that change came directly from the family. Said they preferred a unified message." I nodded. "I see." She gave a polite smile, already moving to the next task. I thanked her because that's what I was trained to do and turned away. My hands didn't shake, but every step I took back toward the elevators felt heavier than the last. Later that afternoon, I found my mother sitting alone in one of the hotel's quieter lounges, a floral teacup balanced on her knee like an afterthought. I didn't ask if she knew I already did. She looked up and smiled, small and hesitant. "Everything okay?" I sat across from her. "Did you agree with it?" She shifted in her seat, smoothing her blouse like it would buy her time. "It wasn't my call, Amy. They just thought maybe this wasn't the moment to reopen things." "Reopen what? Me? Existing?" Her mouth opened, closed again. "Don't make this into a confrontation. This is a celebration. For him. For the family. And for me?" She looked down at her tea. I pressed, my voice steady. "You stood beside him while he called me a failure. You heard it. You said nothing." "I didn't want to make it worse," she whispered. "For who?" She didn't answer. "You've always said I was strong. Strong enough to survive what he couldn't admit. But do you know what that's cost me?" Her eyes filled but didn't spill. "I know you. You'll land on your feet." That was it. That was all I was ever given, strength as a consolation prize, survival as a badge. I stood before she could say anything else and walked back to my room. The hallway felt narrower than before, the carpet thicker under my shoes. Inside, I reached for the notebook I had started the night before. The pen moved faster now. 2023. Speech revoked without notice. Reason, inconvenient presence. I stared at the words until they blurred slightly. Still, I didn't cry. This wasn't grief, it was data. The truth was this. My silence had always been a service, a structure. It allowed their version of the family to stand unshaken. The moment I spoke, the cracks would show. And they knew that. That's why they never had to ask me to stay quiet. They trusted I would. Until now. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memo app. I didn't hesitate. I'd already written the message in my mind. One more cut like this, and bringing the truth to the stage myself. I saved the recording. No title. Just a timestamp. Proof that the line had been drawn. The box under the bed was still untouched, but it no longer felt passive. It felt like a signal, and I was getting closer to lighting it. They always said silence was strength, that silence was grace. But I've come to learn silence is also decay. It's how a legacy crumbles quietly, eaten from the inside, while everyone smiles at the facade. The drive to Lakeway wasn't planned. I told myself I needed air, but what I really needed was proof. Proof that my memory hadn't lied, that there had once been love in a place now stripped of it. Something about the old house, my mother's house, still pulled at me, even after all they'd done. I didn't want it back. I just wanted to remember it right. When I pulled up, I didn't recognize the entrance. The old creaky wooden gate had been replaced by a sleek, matte black security system with motion sensors and a coded entry pad. A brushed steel plaque glinted on a freshly stacked limestone pillar. The Kessler residence. It looked like a property listing on a luxury real estate site, not a home where a woman once knitted on a porch swing and drank tea from a chipped mug. The landscaping had changed too. Gone were the ivy vines that once climbed the siding like green lace. Gone were the azalea bushes I planted when Mom finished her favorite pink blooms ripped out and replaced by gravel and sterile rows of Italian cypress. It was beautiful in the way a showroom is beautiful, detached, hollow, curated for strangers. But beneath the makeover, I still saw fingerprints mine. The drainage system I designed when the backyard flooded every spring, still there, buried, working. The custom stone patio I paid for when Dad refused to deal with the cracking cement, still holding. The HVAC system, the insulation, the replacement roof, all covered by me. Every one of those repairs happened on my dime while Mom was sick. I wired Denton over $60,000 for it. No contracts, no receipts, just trust. And in return, nothing. No name, no mention. I didn't get out of the car. Just sat there, engine off, hands in my lap, staring at the wind chime that still dangled from the eave above the kitchen window. I'd bought it at a garden center one spring, hung it up while Mom sat wrapped in a shawl, laughing as I tried to steady the ladder. It hadn't moved much today, just a soft sway in the breeze, like it remembered me. And yet, now, the house stood under a name that wasn't mine. Its foundations supported by my quiet sacrifices, its stories rewritten to feature everyone but me. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the bar downstairs from my hotel. The place was dimly lit, quite exactly what I needed. I wasn't in the mood for wine or anything strong. Ginger ale felt honest. Clean. That's when I heard Denton's voice. He was holding court at a nearby table, his laugh carrying just far enough to make me flinch. I turned slightly and saw him clinking glasses with one of Dad's old work buddies, a man whose name I couldn't remember, but whose laugh I'd heard at dozens of holiday dinners. "Lakeway looks fantastic," the man said. "You've really done wonders with it." Denton smiled like he'd painted the Sistine Chapel. Just wanted to modernize it, make it livable. That was enough. I stood and walked over, my steps quiet but deliberate. He noticed me before I reached them. He turned slowly, smirked like we were kids again, and I was overreacting to nothing. "Did you ever intend to give me credit for what I did?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Credit? The house." He shrugged, still smiling. "It was for Mom. You wouldn't want to make it about money now, would you?" I didn't clench my jaw. I didn't raise my voice. I just said what needed saying. It was never about the money. It was about memory. But even that seems like too much to ask. He didn't answer. Just turned back to his conversation, dismissing me like background noise in a room filled with men who never once lifted a checkbook while I was draining my savings. That night, I skipped dinner. I went back to my room and opened the notebook I'd carried for years. Not a journal, more like a record. A ledger of all the things they forgot I gave. 2017 renovation. Payment never acknowledged. Outcome, ownership erased. I drew a line underneath. But it didn't feel like a line. It felt like a wall. They always spoke about family like it was sacred. A bond. A fortress. But what I've come to understand is that family, in our case, was a one-way contract. One where the fine print read, "You give, we forget." One where labor was silent, and silence was expected. I sat with that thought as the clock ticked toward midnight. One more theft, I promised myself. One more dismissal. One more erasure of my name from what I built, and it'd stop playing the quiet one. I wouldn't announce it. It'd document it. And when the time came, it'd answer with facts, not forgiveness. Because silence may be grace, but it is not justice. If they needed a show to hear me, then I gave them one. But the real reckoning still sat unopened quiet, patient, and heavier than its size suggested. By the time dessert plates were cleared, and the MC made his final rounds with a forced smile and a hollow, "Let's give one more round of applause for Mr. Kessler," The energy in the room had shifted. Applause came out of obligation, not admiration. Laughter was measured. Everything now felt staged, like the curtain had dropped, but no one had the courage to leave the theater. I returned to my seat like a misplaced shadow, uninvited, unclaimed, and somehow still present. The people I once called family didn't even acknowledge my return. I sat there, folding the napkin on my lap, not to clean, not to fidget, but to remind myself I could still feel something. Fabric, pressure, proof of my own existence. My name was still missing from the event program. No mention, not a word. I looked around the table. Denton was deep in conversation with a defense contractor 2 seats down, all handshake and eye contact playing the part of the respectable heir. Callista was smiling at her phone, probably curating the perfect caption for a filtered photo. Family is everything. And my mother? Her spine stiff with practiced posture, she sat like a sculpture of elegance, unmoving, unseeing, untouchable. And Virgil? He was basking, reclining just enough to appear casual, yet alert to every glance tossed his way, like a king among courtiers. His voice had softened into humility now that the praise was winding down, but the smugness clung to his face like a second skin. Not one of them looked at me. I finished the last of my wine. It had gone warm in my hand, the taste now more like vinegar than vintage. I didn't wince. I let it linger. Bitterness deserved to be tasted fully. Beneath the table, my foot found the box. Still there, wrapped in navy paper, unopened, untouched, like me. They didn't think I'd bring it, didn't think I had it in me to disrupt their perfect narrative. They assumed it'd sit quietly, swallow hard, and vanish again like always. But I had stopped living in the version of myself they wrote. The moment came not with a roar, but with a hum, the lull between courses, between conversations. I stood slowly. No drama, no gasp, just movement with intention. Enough to draw a few glances from adjacent tables. The click of my heels cut across the hush of clinking cutlery and murmured chats. I didn't go to the stage. I didn't grab a mic. I walked directly to Virgil's table. The center of the spotlight, the place reserved for the hero of the night. He looked up, startled at first. Then recognition kicked in, followed by that default smile he wore like a medal. Charming, hollow. Then he saw the box. His smile faltered. I placed it in front of him, gently but firmly. No theatrics, no speech. "This is for you," I said. Calm. Even. He blinked, confused, reaching for the ribbon like a child on Christmas morning, unaware the gift might contain something heavier than joy. I leaned in just slightly, my voice low but clear-aimed perfectly, for the lapel mic still clipped to his jacket. "From your biggest failure, enjoy your retirement." And I turned. No pause. No glance over the shoulder. No appetite for their reaction. The ballroom behind me froze for a second. A breathless, charged silence. Then the sound of whispers, sharp, stunned, electric. Someone let out a laugh, startled and involuntary. A few clapped awkwardly, unsure if it was rebellion or support. I passed Callista Hare's smile, now twitching with uncertainty. My mother stared straight ahead, her hands twisted together like she was holding back a scream. Denton looked pale. I didn't stop. I walked past the linen-draped tables, past the golden centerpieces and the fake smiles, and out the heavy ballroom doors. The night air outside was brisk and honest. Not performative, just there cool against my skin, sobering in a way no wine ever could be. Under the valet canopy, I stood for a long moment, staring up at the stars blurred by city light. My breath came out in small clouds, proof I was still warm, still alive, still here. My phone buzzed in my bag. I didn't look. I didn't need to. No part of me wanted to know what came next. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't wait for an apology or validation. What I felt was anchored, like a puzzle piece had finally slid into place after years of forcing it where it didn't belong. There was no victory dance, no cinematic music, just the sound of my own pulse and the quiet that follows when you've told the truth out loud, and it echoes. That was just chapter 1. What came next would be mine to write. Without them. Without permission. Without apology. If I was invisible before, now I was a mirror. And the family couldn't look away. He didn't open it right away. Of course he didn't. Virgil was always calculated when it came to image, and ripping open a box from the daughter he'd just humiliated on stage would have broken the rhythm of the night. Instead, he carried it like a delicate prop into the private lounge behind the ballroom, where only board members, donors, and people who talked in six-figure abbreviations were allowed. But someone followed him. Not me. Someone else. Someone holding a phone. The video didn't show much, just him sitting in a leather armchair, the box on the coffee table, his fingers undoing the ribbon like it might explode. Then he lifted the lid and froze. Inside was a photograph. I was 12, holding a blue ribbon at the Austin Regional Science Fair. He had his hand on my shoulder, smiling genuinely, not like in the photos with politicians. It was the only moment I remember when he looked at me without disappointment layered behind his eyes. Beneath the photo was a note. You were proud. Once. And below that, a folder. Thick, clearly labeled, Funding Sources 2021 Defense Grant Initiative. He flipped it open. First page, schematic diagrams he'd seen before. Second page, internal memos, typed proposals, annotated graphs. All familiar. What he hadn't seen, what made his shoulders stiffen in the grainy clip were the signatures. My name, my initials. The drafts from when I had consulted quietly, from afar, to help keep the company afloat during their lowest quarter. No credit had ever been given publicly. The final published version bore no resemblance to me, but the architecture, the backbone, it was mine. He closed the folder abruptly. The video cut out there, but it had already circulated by the next morning. Group chats, whispered texts. One board member even forwarded it to me, unintentionally, through a reply-all mistake. Who is she to him, again? One message read. Another answered, the daughter he never talks about. It didn't take long for someone else to make a connection. Years ago, an anonymous technical proposal had been submitted through the company's Open Research Initiative. It had saved a critical contract. The style matched. The phrasing matched. A board member who still had archived drafts sent them to the company archivist. And to me, I didn't confirm anything. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking on my behalf. By midweek, I was getting passive-aggressive calls from Denton. Hey, just wondering if you had time to chat, he'd said with the fake warmth of someone standing on a rug that was being yanked. I didn't respond. Virgil was summoned to an informal meeting with the board. According to someone who was in the room, he downplayed the whole thing. She wasn't looking for credit, he reportedly said. It was internal. We all benefited. The silence that followed must have been deafening. They asked for formal clarification. He declined. That was the moment it shifted. I walked through the hotel lobby that evening, wearing the same jacket I'd had since grad school. Nothing flashy, nothing curated. But this time, people looked up. They didn't look through me. A few offered polite nods. One woman, an executive from another division, simply said, "Thank you." I knew she wasn't talking about a technical report. Upstairs, in my suite, I reopened the notebook. 2021, Proprietary Research Contribution, uncredited. Outcome, crisis averted, silence expected. I paused. Then I wrote, now they see. But not because I asked them to, because I let them look. It was revelation, and once you see clearly, you don't unsee. By morning, the clip had already made it to Twitter, LinkedIn, and someone's cousin's Facebook page. I didn't post it. I didn't even know it had been recorded. But there it was. Grainy footage of me standing at the front of the gala, handing the box to my father, and saying the 7 words that cracked open decades of careful curation. From your biggest failure. Enjoy your retirement. People latched onto it like wildfire. There was a meme within hours. A slow zoom gif of Virgil's frozen face paired with hashtags that ranged from supportive to uncomfortably amused. But what caught me most wasn't the noise. It was the comments from people who recognized the undercurrent. Women who wrote, "I've lived this," or "I was the invisible daughter too." Then a post surfaced that changed everything. It came from a former systems analyst at Kessler Advanced, someone I hadn't worked with directly, but who knew the back channels well. She's the one who funded the survival project. I was there. That comment turned whispers into questions, and questions into phone calls. Less than 12 hours later, an internal finance officer at the company leaked a redacted spreadsheet. The recipient line was anonymized, but the routing number? It matched a holding account I once used to transfer money quietly years ago, when the company was drowning in budget shortfalls and Denton had been parading around pretending everything was under control. That money, $200,000, came from me. It had been used to fund the company's innovation arm, the same one Denton now held up as the reason they were future-proofed. The same department featured in his interviews, the same initiative he credited in the toast that followed Virgil's speech. When board members saw the receipts, they asked for a meeting. Virgil refused. Denton tried spinning. It was a family effort, he claimed. We had private supporters, yes, but it was all under the Kessler vision. But then came the next blow. Someone found out about the tribute, the one I had sent days before the Galathi-framed photo, the note. I had tracked the package, knew it had arrived on time, but it never made it to the display table. A tech assistant confessed quietly to a mutual contact. We were told to swap it. Callista said it didn't match the visual brand of the event. What they replaced it with? A generic plaque with her name engraved at the bottom. It sat under the spotlight, while mine was likely stuffed into a closet somewhere backstage. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote the first thing I'd ever posted publicly about my family. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I told the truth in order. The funding, the decisions, the silence. I shared why I never spoke up before, because I believed it would make things worse. That I had confused loyalty with complicity. That silence is the currency of dysfunctional families, and I had spent mine for too long. It was never about being chosen, I wrote. It was about being truthful. The response? Overwhelming. STEM networks picked it up. Women's leadership forums quoted it. Former interns, professors, even quiet employees from years back messaged me with 2 words. Thank you. My name trended not for what it'd done, but for what I had finally confirmed. Back at headquarters, Virgil held a press conference or tried to. The statement was short, defensive, legal. Denton's face was drawn in every screenshot, like someone who knew the applause would never sound the same again. And me? I waited. Not for permission, not for applause, just for breath. Then I stood before a new audience and said what needed to be said. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. 3 days passed before I heard from him. No subject, no message. Just an email with a single attachment, 1 photo. Scanned. Slightly grainy. The same photo I had left in the box. Me at 12, beaming with my blue ribbon, his arm around my shoulder. Only now it was reframed, cropped tighter, enhanced for clarity. In the corner of the image, I spotted a reflection, his office wall. The frame hung next to one of his awards. It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it wasn't nothing. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to, trying to decide whether it was a sign of guilt or just a rearranged trophy. Either way, I didn't reply. I closed the laptop and left it shut. Later that night, another message arrived, this time from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 15 years. Gerald Lynn. He'd been a senior systems engineer back in my early career days at Kessler. One of the few who ever treated me like I belonged in the lab. His message was simple. I remember the first proposal. It had your fingerprints all over it. I was too afraid to speak back then. I'm sorry. I sat with that line for a while, unsure what it stirred in me. Anger? No. Sadness, maybe. but mostly just recognition. That kind of truth doesn't need to be shouted to count. I typed back, "You just did." No exclamation mark, no need. By morning, the online frenzy had shifted to something quieter, more focused. My open letter continued circulating, shared by scientists, journalists, advocacy groups. But it wasn't viral anymore. It was being studied, cited. I even saw a university ethics panel use it as a case study. Still, nothing had hit me as hard as the drawing. It came by mail crayon on thick paper, folded twice, with a sticker sealing it shut. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the front. It was Lumen. Inside, a sketch of me standing atop a rocket ship, written across its side in purple block letters, "Truth." Underneath was her message, "You're my favorite scientist. Love, Lumen." That one, I framed. Not the news clippings, not the spreadsheets, or the leaked memo, just that. I hung it next to my desk, where I could see it when I needed reminding that not every version of the family story had been poisoned. The day I left Austin, I took a slow walk around Lady Bird Lake. The city looked both familiar and far away, like something I used to dream of when I was younger, trying to decide if it could ever feel like home again. I didn't make peace with everything. That's not how real healing works. My father still hadn't said the words. Denton never retracted his claims. My mother remained somewhere between regret and loyalty, as she always had. But for once, I didn't need any of them to define me. I had stopped asking. I had stopped hoping they'd rewrite the story in my favor. I rewrote it myself. As I reached the last bend of the trail, sun glinting off the lake, a little boy on a scooter zoomed past me and nearly knocked over a woman walking her dog. She laughed it off, shook her head, and said aloud to no one in particular, "Kids always have to test the edge before they believe it's real." I smiled. Yeah, they do. Later, at the airport, as I sat by my gate waiting to board, I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed something not for anyone else, not to post, just for me. A conclusion, I guess. Or maybe just a beginning I hadn't dared to write before. You don't always get justice. Sometimes you just get your voice back. And that's enough. Some stories don't end with applause. They end in quiet clarity, when you finally understand that being unseen doesn't mean you were never there. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that protecting the family name was more important than protecting my truth. But silence is not grace when it erases you, and legacy should never come at the cost of someone else's voice. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't force people to give you what they don't know how to give. But you can stop asking. You can build your own table, even if they never offered you a seat at theirs. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to name what happened. And you are absolutely allowed to walk away without guilt. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped create? Or maybe you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. Tell me in the comments, type 1 if this story hit close to home. Or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate with you, I still want to know why. What did it make you think about? If this video moved you, if it made you stop and reflect, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We've got more to share, stories that are real, raw, and worth remembering. Thank you for being here. Your voice matters too.
Hello, my name's Paige, and my sister watched me bleed, stood right there, arms crossed, while her husband kept swinging at me. Not out of fear, not by mistake, because I said no. To signing a loan. That's all it took to turn family into witnesses, silence into betrayal. They told me I was dramatic, said I was ruining everything. But I wasn't the one forging signatures. I wasn't the one parking outside someone's apartment at night. They called it a dream. I called it survival. So tell me, how far would your own blood go when you stop saying yes? And if they came for your peace, would anyone believe you? The drive home from base was quiet. No podcasts, no music, just the low hum of my tires against the asphalt and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windshield. I liked that kind of silence. It gave my mind space to settle, to sort the static that built up after long days.
I pulled into my apartment complex just as the sun dipped beneath the tree line, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Fall in Austin had a strange rhythm, mornings brisk enough for a jacket, evenings warm enough to forget it at home. My bones felt it, though, especially my shoulder, the one I'd torn during a medevac drill years ago. It flared up every October like clockwork. Inside, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my boots, and stood still for a moment. Just breathing. The quiet was mine, the space was mine. No sandstorms, no thudding rotor blades, no one needing blood types or morphine or a steady hand. Just me, four walls, and the kind of peace I never quite trusted, but always craved. I changed into an old army tee, tied my hair back, and started prepping dinner. Grilled chicken, steamed broccoli, jasmine rice. Simple, balanced, predictable, like everything I'd built in the years since coming home. The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it was firm. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole and felt my gut tighten. Isolde, and behind her, Dexter. I opened the door with a practiced calm. "Hey," I said, stepping aside. Isolde smiled wide, holding up a bottle of Cabernet like it was a peace treaty. "We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd surprise you." That was her line. Always in the neighborhood. Always just dropping by, like this wasn't a city with 500,000 people and 20 miles of traffic between our lives. Dexter gave me his version of polite. Chin lifted, eyes scanning. "Place looks nice," he said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. I nodded, closed the door, and led them to the kitchen. Isolde set the wine down on the counter like it belonged there, already talking about some new boutique she'd visited, some yoga retreat she wanted to try. Her voice was sugar-laced, but I felt the strain behind it. Like she was performing for someone, maybe even herself. I poured wine for them and water for myself, sat across from them at the small dining table, letting them settle in. Isolde reached into her purse and pulled out a thick brochure, glossy, heavy stock. "We've found something," she said, sliding it toward me. "It's incredible." I flipped it open. A 100-acre ranch just outside Fredericksburg. White fences, rolling hills, a renovated barn turned wedding venue. It looked like something from a Hallmark movie. "We've been dreaming about this," she said, fingers tapping the photo of the main house. "It's our legacy. We could build something real here. And with your name on the loan application, the bank would approve it in a heartbeat." I blinked. "Wait, you want me to sign as a guarantor?" Dexter leaned forward. "Not just that. You'd be part of it. We'd all benefit." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level. "That's a $1.2 million mortgage." Isolde smiled wider. "But with your record, your credit score, your career, it's just paperwork. We'll handle the rest." I stared at them. I thought about the years I'd spent scraping myself together, building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. And now they were here, turning that independence into a bargaining chip. "I appreciate the idea," I said carefully. "But that's a big commitment. I need to think about it." Dexter's jaw twitched. "It's not like we're asking you to pay it off. Just back us up." Isolde's smile flickered, just a crack. She placed her wine glass down, harder than necessary. The sound echoed. A shift. Small, but unmistakable. The conversation stumbled after that. We talked about nothing for another 10 minutes. Weather, Austin traffic, an old friend from high school, but the air had gone stale. Isolde's voice had lost its lilt. Dexter was glued to his phone. They left without finishing their drinks. I didn't walk them out. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the glasses. The brochure sat on the table, its glossy cover now spotted with condensation from the wine. I dried my hands, picked it up, and stared at the numbers again. 1.2 million. Paige Voss. U.S. Army. Reliable. Steady. The sister who always said yes. But not this time. As I rinsed the glasses they left behind, I realized they hadn't come to visit. They'd come to collect. I wiped the counter slowly, letting the residue from their wine glasses evaporate with the rest of my nerves. The room still held their scent, a blend of overly sweet perfume and some cologne that always struck me as trying too hard.
I stood for a while, staring out my kitchen window, watching nothing in particular. The brochure was still on the table, untouched since I set it down hours ago. I didn't need to open it again. The images were already imprinted, not just on the page, but in the back of my mind. It was Wednesday. Midweek always brought a heavier pace at the base, and the distraction was a small relief. I'd been reviewing simulation results from Numedics, their reports scattered across my desk like a controlled mess, my preferred kind. I was highlighting a section on field tourniquet procedures when my phone buzzed. I reached for it without much thought, expecting a logistics update. It was from Isolda. No message, just a photo. The image was familiar. Two little girls in oversized military jackets, one with her cap turned backward, the other missing a front tooth. We were leaning against our dad's old Jeep, grinning like the world would never touch us. Underneath, the caption read, "Guess we're not teammates anymore." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I just sat there, the phone in my hand, heart somewhere between a skip and a stall. I hadn't seen that picture in over 20 years. We used to keep it on the fridge when Dad was stationed in Fort Benning. It had always made me feel safe, until now. Now it felt like a warning shot. She knew exactly what she was doing. That message wasn't nostalgia. It was guilt, wrapped in a memory we both used to treasure, and that hurt more than I expected. I set the phone face down and returned to the reports, but the page blurred. I was reading words I knew by heart, but couldn't recall the meaning. 2 days passed. I stayed busy, filled my hours with instruction drills and paperwork. When I got home Friday evening, I found a box at my door. No label, no note at first glance. Inside was a handbag. Designer. Not just expensive, obscene. The kind you see influencers show off in filtered lighting with captions about self-love and success. Tucked inside the purse's zipper was a small folded card. "For the sister who always carries us. Now let us carry you." I held that card like it might burn me. The words, clever, calculated. There was no love in them, just leverage. I placed the bag on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. Isolda didn't do gestures without angles. She'd never had that kind of warmth in her. Every kindness was an investment. Every compliment, a setup. The next morning, I texted Camber. We hadn't caught up in weeks. Too long. She replied almost immediately, told me to meet her at our usual coffee spot. It was a small place on the east side, the kind where regulars never needed to give their names, and the servers remembered how you took your coffee after the second visit. I liked it because no one cared who I was there, just a woman with a caffeine habit and a lot on her mind. Camber slid into the booth across from me, sunglasses perched on her head, phone already silenced. She took one look at me and said, "Let me guess. Isolda's playing the sentiment card." I raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know?" "She did it to her ex-husband before the divorce papers landed," she replied, shaking a sugar packet. "Memory bombs and expensive distractions. Classic Isolda." I told her about the photo. Then the handbag. She listened carefully, sipping her coffee with that narrowed expression she got when she was putting pieces together. "She's not giving you a gift," she said finally. "She's buying a receipt." I let that sit for a beat. Part of me wants to believe it's not that deep, that she's just trying. Camber didn't flinch. "Trying what, exactly? To remind you of when you didn't know better? To make you feel like you owe her something because she showed up in your life again?" "I don't want this to blow up," I admitted. "I just want peace." "That's the thing about people like your sister," Camber said, leaning back. "They don't want peace. They want position. And when you stop playing along, they call you selfish." The words stung because they were true, and deep down, I had known that for a while. That night, I sat in bed with the lights off, scrolling mindlessly through messages. Nothing new. Just the usual work updates and a group thread with a few old army buddies who mostly shared dog memes and weekend plans. Then, at 11:42 p.m., another message came through from Isolda. Another photo. This time it was me in uniform, standing proudly at my commissioning ceremony, shaking hands with our commanding officer. Isolda had her arm looped through mine, her smile beaming. I remembered that day vividly. I'd worked years to get there. She'd flown in that morning, left before the reception even started. The caption this time: "I was there for your big day, but I guess dreams only go one way." No greeting, no follow-up, just that. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed out 3 different replies, deleted each one. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be used against me later. That was the trick with people like her. They collected your words, your silence, your history, and turned them into weapons when the time was right. I turned the phone off, placed it on the nightstand face down, and lay back in the dark. What she didn't know is that her memories weren't the only ones I kept, and not all of them were sweet. I hadn't seen that handwriting in years, but it stopped me cold the second I spotted it. The same slant in the loops, the way the letters curled too neatly at the end of each line. It was Isolda's. She used to write our grocery lists like she was penning a wedding invitation. Perfect cursive, flourished loops, even if it was just for eggs and milk. I stared at the note. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign. No name. No explanation. No direct threat. Just that kind of message designed to sit under your skin and burrow into your nerves." I held the paper for another minute before folding it, slipping it between 2 folders in my kitchen drawer labeled Utilities and Tax Receipts. I couldn't sleep that night. I laid on my back, staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the window blinds cutting across the walls like bars. My shoulder ached, a familiar pain that came and went, like a whisper from the past. I reached up to rub it, and my fingers brushed the scar beneath the skin. That old wound hadn't acted up in a while. That's when it came flooding back. I was 19, home from college for spring break. Isolda and I were supposed to be cleaning out the guest room for our cousin, who was visiting from El Paso. I had $20 to my name, had been living off instant ramen and dollar tacos for weeks. Isolda asked if she could borrow the last of it. I told her no. I needed it for gas to get back to school. She didn't yell. She didn't slam a door. She just waited until I turned to walk down the stairs, then shoved me, hard. 3 steps. That's all it took. My foot slipped, my elbow cracked against the railing, and I landed with my back against the tile, breath knocked clean out of me. I didn't cry right away. I remember that clearly. I just laid there, stunned, and watched her look down at me, face completely blank. Later, at the hospital, I told the nurse I'd fallen in the shower. My mom whispered on the drive home, "Let it go, Paige. Sisters fight. Don't make it worse." So I let it go, like I let everything go. Until now. The following morning, I pulled myself out of bed early and walked the perimeter of my apartment building. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: tracks, evidence, a sign, but it wasn't hard to spot. A black pickup parked across the street from my unit, engine off, windows tinted. No one inside, not for the first time, and not by coincidence. I snapped a photo, noting the license plate and timestamp, then another from a different angle. A chill crept over me, but I pushed it down. Back in Kandahar, I'd learned how to notice patterns. How silence, when it came in the wrong places, meant everything. This silence was the same. I walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and pulled out the small box from under my bed. Inside were a handful of tools: my digital recorder, a motion detector light, and a small security camera I'd used in a past rental. It didn't stream to the cloud, but it recorded everything to an SD card. I installed it near my mailbox, angled just enough to capture the sidewalk, street, and the front of my building. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted proof. There's a difference. The next few days passed in a kind of fog. At work, I kept my voice steady while teaching, but I was off. One of my cadets asked if I was okay during a training debrief. I told him I was just tired. He nodded and didn't ask again, but I knew he saw it, the extra edge in my tone, the way I double-checked the exits more often than usual. Back at home, I began keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic, just notes, times, details. Truck was back at 8:14 p.m., left by 9:06. Headlights didn't turn on until it pulled out. No driver visible. On Thursday, I took a longer route home from base, drove past my own street twice before looping back in, just to see if I was being followed. I wasn't, but the truck was already there, parked in the same spot. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I moved through the apartment in the dark, lit only by the flicker of the television. I wasn't afraid, not really, just waiting, like I had been before so many raids overseas, the sense that something was coming, the certainty that no one was going to stop it but me. Around midnight, I stepped out onto the balcony with a mug of tea. I kept the lights off so I wouldn't be a silhouette. While, across the street, the truck idled for another 10 minutes before driving off. No headlights again. When I came back inside, I found another note. This one wasn't in the mailbox or taped to the door. It was slid underneath it, deliberate, precise, same handwriting. You've got until Sunday, family or no family. No signature, just that. But now it wasn't a suggestion, it was a deadline. The next morning, I forwarded the license plate and photos to Camber with no context, just, "Can you run this?" She called an hour later. "That's Dexter's old truck. He sold it after the wedding, or claimed to. Registration's still in his name." I thanked her, promised I'd keep her updated, and hung up. That evening, I locked every window, bolted every door. I'd done it 1,000 times before, overseas, on base, in transit. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't the kind of threat you could disarm with a weapon or neutralize with a tactic. This was closer, quieter, more dangerous. It was family. Sunday came like a slow drum roll, steady and inevitable. I didn't want to go to dinner, but saying no would have meant feeding their narrative, that I was pulling away, that I was acting better than everyone else, that I was too military to be family. So I baked a casserole, my mother's favorite, sausage and sweet potato, the one I always made when we were pretending to be close. The sun was dipping low as I pulled into her driveway. The sky had that peach blue haze Texas evenings are known for, and from the street, everything looked peaceful. The porch light was already on. The scent of fried okra wafted faintly through the air as I stepped up the path, familiar, almost comforting, until I opened the door. The house buzzed with voices and clinking silverware, laughter here and there, people talking over each other. I spotted my Uncle Gordon near the living room, holding a beer, mid-story about something that happened at his auto shop. My mother waved from the kitchen without breaking stride, calling out, "Just set the casserole on the counter, hun." I did. Then I stepped into the dining room and felt it. Everyone was already seated. A spot had been left for me at the end of the table, furthest from the head. I nodded, gave a small smile. Nobody said a word, no greeting, no "Hey Paige," no eye contact. I took my seat. Conversations picked up again, like I hadn't walked in at all. They weren't ignoring me outright. It was worse than that. They were talking around me, like I was furniture. I passed the cornbread without being asked, poured water in silence, listened as my cousin joked about someone's bad haircut. I tried to catch my mother's eyes once, just once. She didn't look up from her glass of iced tea. Then came the moment I should have seen coming. My uncle leaned over his plate, fork dangling in hand. "In this family, we always show up for each other," he said with a grin, looking right past me. "Right, Paige?" Someone chuckled. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. My mother didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sipped her tea. The thing about these dinners, they don't blow up, they bleed out, in little cuts. In the way they use silence to shame, in jokes that aren't jokes, in stares that say more than words ever could. I set my spoon down. "I need to go," I said softly, rising from the table. And that's when my mother finally spoke. Not with concern, not even curiosity, just a sigh and a question sharpened with judgment. "Do you always have to take everything so personally?" I looked around the table. Not one person met my gaze. My hands were steady as I picked up my purse. The casserole sat untouched on the counter. I didn't bother wrapping it. As I stepped into the hallway, footsteps followed, heels clicking with purpose. I didn't have to look back to know it was her, Isolde. She waited until we were alone, right there in the narrow entryway, just out of view of the rest. Her tone was casual, polished, too smooth to be anything but rehearsed. "You won't do anything," she said. "You never do." That line. I'd heard it before. Not just in words, but in tone, In glances, in every moment she'd pushed me around growing up, when she'd shoved me down the stairs, when she'd told people I was too rigid to understand fun. When she'd watched me cry and asked flatly, "Are you done yet?" Back then, she was right. I never did anything. I let it slide. I kept peace. I told myself family came first. But this time, something in me shifted. Not rage, not fear, just certainty. I met her gaze, said nothing, held it long enough for her to look away first. Then I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me without a word. The night air hit like a slap. I got into my car, sat still for a moment, and let the engine hum beneath my hands. I didn't turn the radio on, just drove, letting the rhythm of the tires fill the silence. Halfway down the highway, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Isolde. Family means sometimes doing things you don't want to do. I didn't read the rest. I deleted it. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky was full dark. My security light flickered as I parked. I grabbed the tote bag from the back seat, the one I kept all the documents in, and carried it inside. I set the bag on the dining table, made myself a cup of tea, sat down with the property brochure she'd handed me days ago. I flipped it open. The ranch, the pasture, the white fences. I circled the address with a red pen, not to highlight it, but to mark it like a target. Then, in the margin, I wrote, "This isn't my dream. It never was." I slid the paper into a manila folder, labeled it, "Evidence, in case." Not for drama, not for revenge, for protection. They said I never do anything. This time, I did something they didn't see coming. I woke up to thunder rolling low in the distance, the kind of sound that lingered, thick and stretched, like the sky itself was warning me. Rain hadn't started yet, but the air outside my apartment was heavy with the smell of it. It was the middle of the week, and I should have been thinking about the training modules I had to finalize for Friday's medic refresher, but my mind was stuck on one thing, the folder sitting on my kitchen table, and the note I'd slid into it 2 nights ago. I had told myself I was done. That writing those words, "This isn't my dream," was the end of it. But endings don't always stay endings, especially not in families like mine, where silence is currency and loyalty is a weapon. I texted Camber and asked if she had a window that afternoon. She replied instantly, 2:30, legal aid office, bring everything. By noon, I'd gathered every document I had. The property brochure, the printout of the email Isolde had sent titled Joint Opportunity, the photo of the black truck with Dexter's plates, the note with her handwriting, every little piece that had made my skin crawl over the past 3 weeks. I tucked them all into the folder marked Evidence, in case, and zipped it into my work tote. Before I left, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, pulled my hair into a low bun, and looked myself straight in the eye. I'd faced gunfire in places where help was a 40-minute helicopter ride away. I'd held lives in my hands. I wasn't about to back down from a woman who thought manipulation passed for love. By the time I arrived, the rain had started in sheets, tapping hard against the windshield as I parked. I ran inside, damp but not drenched, and found Camber waiting at the back table, already flipping through her tablet. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "You brought the war bag. Good." I pulled out the folder and set it down. "You might want coffee first." 10 minutes later, she had gone through half of it. When she reached the forged loan application, she stilled. "Paige, this is felony territory." I nodded once, jaw clenched. "I didn't sign it." "And they submitted it under your name?" "Yes. I got a courtesy notification from the bank this morning. Said they were pre-processing because my co-borrowers had confirmed the first stage of paperwork. I never saw the original. Only this copy." She held up the page. "This signature, it's close, but it's not yours." "I haven't signed anything for her since 2011, I said, voice flat. Camber sat back in her chair and folded her arms. "They're escalating. I told you they would." I stared at her, not blinking. "So what's next?" "We open a case file. We start documenting everything officially, and we protect your finances immediately. You need to alert the bank. freeze co-signing permissions, and file a fraud report. I exhaled, slow and steady. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Camber pulled out a new folder and began labeling tabs. You've been trained to patch wounds, Paige. I get that. But it's time to stop letting them make new ones. This isn't just messy, it's criminal. As I sat across from her, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit. I'd always assumed that if this ever got ugly, my role was to manage the fallout, to absorb it until things settled. But this wasn't about keeping peace anymore. It was about refusing to be collateral damage. Back home, I placed the new folder beside the old one on my desk. 2 volumes now. Truth, backed by proof. My phone buzzed on the counter. Voicemail. I played it on speaker as I sorted documents. Hey, it's me. Isolde's voice was soft, overly sweet. Her Sunday brunch tone. I just don't get why you're making this so hard. We're trying to build something. And you always used to just go along with things. I mean, come on, Paige. You've always been the reliable one. Don't ruin that. I stopped what I was doing and hit delete. No saving this one. No more folders for family guilt. That evening, I lit a candle in the living room, not for ambiance, but for focus. My therapist once told me fire helped some people process anger in a way nothing else could. I wasn't trying to be symbolic. I just needed something to steady my breathing. I opened my notebook, the one labeled Safety and Strategy, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Silence doesn't mean agreement. Then, I will no longer let family weaponize memory. I will not be guilted into jeopardizing my career, housing, or financial security. I will not excuse behavior because it's wrapped in bloodlines. I will protect my peace like I protect my rank. I am allowed to say no, without apology, without explanation. Somewhere in the building, thunder cracked and the power flickered, then returned. I kept writing. At the bottom of the page, I penned one final line. The next time they cross the line, I won't stand there bleeding. I folded the page once, slid it into the front of the binder. Then I closed it gently, laid my hand on top, and let the weight of it ground me. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't moving it for anyone. I drew my line, and of course, they trampled it. The sound of my own voice echoed faintly in my ears. I won't stand there bleeding. But that night, I'd come to learn how quickly promises could be tested. It was Friday evening, and the apartment felt unusually quiet, like the stillness before a thunderclap. The rain had started earlier, soft and slow, tapping against the windows like an anxious visitor. I moved through my nightly routine deliberately, grounding myself in the familiar tea kettle on, laptop open, locks checked, twice. I was reviewing my folder one more time, adding a few sticky notes to timelines and cross-referencing voicemail timestamps, when my phone buzzed on the table. No contact name, just a local number I didn't recognize. I answered on instinct. There was a pause, then a man's voice, low and thick with arrogance. You'll want to open the door when we come. Don't make this ugly. Click. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart kicking against my ribs like it wanted out. The line had gone dead. No message, no follow-up. Just that. I stood there in the kitchen, teacup still warm in my other hand, steam curling past my face. I set it down slowly, walked over to the window, and peeked through the blinds. There it was. That black truck again, same spot across the street. Headlights off, engine running. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I grabbed my phone, dialed Camber. It rang 3 times, then voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I activated the emergency alert code we'd set up together, a message pre-written to send to both her and base security. It read, Code red. Home. Immediate. Then I backed away from the window. The first knock wasn't a knock. It was a hit. Heavy, full-bodied, a shoulder or boot slamming into wood, my front door groaned on its hinges, then another, louder. I grabbed the landline, dialed the base MP dispatch, but before the first ring could finish, the doorframe cracked. He was inside. Dexter's frame filled the space like a shadow turned solid. His eyes were wild, glossy with whatever he'd been drinking, face flushed red beneath a week's worth of unshaven stubble. The collar of his shirt was damp. Rain or sweat, I didn't care. He reeked of whiskey and power. "Where's the damn paperwork?" he growled, voice slurred but clear enough to make my stomach clench. I tried to step back, but he was faster. His hand slammed into my chest, shoving me against the wall. My shoulder, already worn from combat gear and weight, hit the frame so hard I heard something pop. Pain bloomed immediately, hot, radiating. I gasped, more in shock than sound. Before I could regain footing, he was on me again, gripping my wrist, dragging me toward the center of the living room. That's when I saw her. Isolde, standing just inside the broken door. Arms folded, rain dripping from her hair, down her cheek, and still, not a single shred of panic. She watched like she was supervising a contractor fixing her roof. "Isolde," I rasped. "Call someone. Do something." She tilted her head slightly, and with the same cold cadence she'd used since we were kids, she said, "You should have signed." My vision blurred, not from tears, from fury. I twisted out of Dexter's grip, lunged for the lamp on the side table, and swung. The base cracked against his forearm. He cursed, grabbed me by the waist, and slammed me down onto the hardwood. My ribs took the brunt. I heard the thud of bone against wood. The impact rattled my teeth. He straddled me, yelling something about betrayal, about family, about how "you made us do this." I reached blindly, hand connecting with my phone, still on the floor from earlier. I didn't have time to unlock it, but I didn't need to. My other hand found the emergency button, part of my personal security system issued by base protocol for high-risk officers. I pressed it twice. A silent beacon went off, alerting base MPs with my coordinates and status. Dexter didn't notice. He was too busy tearing the file folder open, papers scattering like leaves in the wind. Evidence fluttered across the floor. Pages I'd spent weeks organizing. My blood was on some of them now. "You picked the wrong soldier," I whispered, voice cracked, barely audible. He paused. Not in fear. He didn't believe I had backup. Just long enough for me to crawl out from under him, dragging my injured leg. I reached for the hallway. The panic button had done its job, but I needed to survive until help arrived. He lunged after me again, but this time I was ready. I kicked back with everything I had. My boot caught him square in the shin. He fell sideways, knocking over the coat rack. Sirens, faint but growing louder. Dexter froze. Isolde took a step back. "They're coming," I said, not to him, but to myself. He pulled her by the arm, yanked her toward the door. They slipped out into the rain like ghosts abandoning a failed haunt. The door hung crooked, barely clinging to the frame. I staggered to my feet, blood warm against my temple, breath coming in shudders. My vision danced at the edges, but I forced myself toward the folder, what remained of it, and clutched it to my chest. Then I made it to the porch. Headlights flashed in the mist. 2 military police vehicles pulled up fast, tires hissing against wet pavement. One of the officers jumped out before the car fully stopped, radio in one hand, eyes locked on me. I raised a trembling hand to salute. "Captain Voss?" he called out, already moving toward me. "Yes," I croaked. "They were here." I handed him the bloodied folder. He took it like it held a detonator, nodding toward his partner. "We've got a situation," he said into his mic. "And it's going federal." The courtroom didn't scare me. I'd been in places where rockets fell without warning, where medics had to work by flashlight and adrenaline. But betrayal in daylight, betrayal in the presence of the law, the truth, and the people who were supposed to protect you, that cut differently, more surgically. It was early Tuesday morning when Camber picked me up. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the streets of downtown Austin were still wet from overnight rain. I clutched the manila folder on my lap like it held the oxygen I needed to breathe. Exhibit A, home security footage, was clipped to the top of the stack, followed by hospital records, photo evidence, voicemails, and the transcript of the 911 call placed by base MPs. Camber didn't talk much on the drive. She didn't have to. Her presence was steady, like a metronome keeping time for a heart that wanted to race. When we arrived at the federal courthouse, I paused on the steps, looked up, took a deep breath. This wasn't war, but it was a battlefield, just a different kind. Inside, the hearing room was sterile and quiet, pale wood benches, a clean, polished floor. It smelled like old carpet and printed paper. The only noise was the shuffle of files, the occasional cough, and the clicking of legal shoes against tile. The judge hadn't entered yet. I scanned the room and saw them, Dexter and Isolde, sitting 2 rows ahead. He wore a pressed suit, his hair neatly combed, a flag pin on his lapel like he'd earned something that made up for what he'd done. Isolde was dressed in navy blue, subtle, serious, controlled. She didn't turn around. Camber leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm not sure okay is in my vocabulary today," I said. She offered a slight nod, then turned her attention forward as the bailiff called everyone to rise. The judge entered, introduced the case, and we began. The prosecution laid out the charges first: unlawful entry, physical assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and endangerment of a federal officer, since I was technically still under military jurisdiction at the time of the attack. They presented timelines, statements, and then the video. The footage rolled on a screen to the left of the judge's bench. It was silent, colorless, a bit grainy, but every moment was clear. The knock. The door breaking, Dexter entering. Isolde behind him, me being shoved, grabbed, thrown. At the moment where Isolde said, "You should have signed," the courtroom stilled. No one breathed. When the video stopped, Camber stood. "Exhibit A, Your Honor. The rest is for context, but the truth is already there." Next came my turn to testify. I walked slowly to the stand, my side still stiff from the bruised ribs. The judge asked if I needed a cushion, and I said no. I wanted to feel the discomfort. I wanted to remember this moment fully. Camber's voice was calm but strong as she questioned me. "Captain Voss, can you describe your relationship with the defendants prior to the incident?" "Dexter is my brother-in-law. Isolde is my sister." "And what happened in the weeks leading up to the night of the assault?" "They asked me to co-sign a mortgage. I declined. Repeatedly. They escalated. There were threats, manipulation, and eventually, violence." "What was said to you at the moment of the assault?" I looked across the room. Isolde was staring at her lap. She said, "You should have signed." The silence in the room became heavier, like even the air was waiting for someone to deny it. But nobody did. Camber handed me the printed screenshots of their messages. "Were these sent to you by either defendant?" "Yes." "Do you believe they intended to intimidate you into signing against your will?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Camber nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney, a man named Brackett, stood. His suit was expensive, but his tone was cheap. "Captain Voss, is it true that your sister has always supported your military career? She's attended 2 events in 20 years. "I don't call that support." He smirked. "And you've had a complicated relationship with her, haven't you?" "No," I said. "She's had a complicated relationship with boundaries." A murmur passed through the room. Brackett turned to the judge. "We'd like to call Dexter Vaughn to the stand." Dexter approached like a man auditioning for sainthood. Slow steps, humble shoulders. He swore on the Bible, sat down, and launched into a speech about PTSD, stress, the weight of being a discharged Marine, and how emotions got the better of me. He even pulled out a framed certificate of service and placed it gently on the table before him. Camber leaned over to me. "That medal he's wearing? It's not his." My jaw clenched. "Can you prove it?" She nodded, already texting someone. "Give me 5 minutes." Sure enough, when cross-examined, Camber produced official military service records. No such award had ever been given to Dexter Vaughn. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Vaughn, are you presenting falsified military honors in this courtroom?" Dexter stumbled. "I was told by a buddy. I didn't know." It was over. Right there. Everyone in the room could see the lie unraveling. No more speeches. No more sympathy. Then they called Isolde. She walked to the stand slowly. Her expression was neutral, but I saw her fingers trembling. Just slightly. She was sworn in, sat down, and bracket began. Miss Kavanaugh, were you aware of your husband's intention to confront your sister that night? She hesitated. He wanted to talk to her. That's all. And did you witness any violence? Long pause. Then, without looking at anyone, she whispered, Yes. Can you clarify? I saw him hit her. Twice. Maybe more. Did you intervene? Another pause. No. And did you, at any point, say the words, "You should have signed"? Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice stayed flat. Yes. It was quiet for so long afterward that I could hear the judge shifting in his chair. I didn't look at her. Not once. Not even when she stepped down, her shoulders curled like the weight of her lies had finally caught up. After both sides made closing statements, the judge called a recess for deliberation. Outside, in the hallway, Camber leaned against the wall beside me. Whatever happens, you did it. I nodded, the weight in my chest starting to lift, just slightly. An hour later, we were called back in. The judge read the verdict aloud. Guilty, on all counts. Dexter would serve time. Federal. Isolde, while spared prison due to her cooperation, was barred from contacting me indefinitely and would be civilly liable for damages. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled for the first time in weeks, because sometimes justice doesn't feel like victory, it just feels like finally being heard. The court delivered justice, but healing was mine to finish alone. The morning after the verdict, I sat in my car outside the courthouse long after the parking lot had emptied. The adrenaline was gone. My ribs still ached, though the bruises were fading. I kept replaying the last words the judge spoke, each one echoing like a slow drumbeat. Guilty on all counts. But that wasn't what lingered. What stuck with me was Isolde's voice when she finally broke on the stand. Not the tears, those didn't move me, but the moment her voice trembled as she admitted, "We just wanted the land." That was it. Not a plea for forgiveness, not an apology, just a sentence that reduced everything, our childhood, our bond, my broken bones, into one shallow motive. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the park off Manor Road where Dad used to take us when we were little. The swing set had been replaced, the benches repainted, but the hill at the back was still there. I parked facing it and watched the wind move through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not the kind that builds into sobs, just a steady, quiet release that ran from my eyes without asking for attention. Later that afternoon, Camber called. "They're preparing formal documentation," she said. "Dexter will be transferred by week's end. Isolde's civil penalties are being calculated now. She'll be served by next month." "Thanks," I replied, voice rough from the emotion I hadn't quite shaken. "You sure you don't want to make a statement to the press?" "No," I said. "Let the footage speak for itself." We hung up. I sat in the silence for a while longer before starting the engine and driving home. The apartment still smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon oil, left over from the base MP's sweep. They'd documented everything, cataloged every drop of blood, every broken frame, every word scribbled in the margins of the evidence I handed over. But what no one cataloged, what no report would reflect, was the silence. The silence of people who should have called. The silence of family members who hadn't reached out. The silence from my mother, who never once asked if I was okay. That was the loudest sound in my life now. The following week, I returned to base. Not because I had to, because I needed to. Teaching young medics how to keep their heads in chaos reminded me of who I was before all this. It tethered me back to something steadier than trauma. In class, I didn't mention what happened. They knew. Most of them had seen the internal notice, but they respected the boundary I set with a simple nod. I was grateful for that. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter in the mail, not from court, not from a lawyer, from Isolde. Typed. 1 page. "I hope you're doing well. I've started therapy. I know that doesn't undo what happened. I don't expect anything from you. Just wanted to say, I'm trying to be better, for real this time. There was no return address, no signature at the bottom. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my binder. Not under evidence, not under legal, just behind everything. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away. Some days passed. A few people who hadn't spoken to me during the trial reached out with half-hearted checking-in messages. I responded politely, but I didn't open that door again. Then came the email from Fort Sam Houston. They were holding a closed conference on domestic abuse within military families. One of the organizers, a former colleague, had submitted my name. They wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. Speaking publicly meant stepping out of the quiet I'd fought so hard to reclaim. But then I remembered that there were women like me still trying to survive in silence, and silence was what let it grow. The day of the event, I wore my uniform, the same one that had blood on it not long ago, now cleaned, pressed, restored. As I stood at the podium, lights dimmed and faces faded into shadow, I took a breath and began. I'm not here to retell the pain. I'm here to tell the truth that follows it. I walked them through my story, not the courtroom version, the real one, the manipulation that looked like love, the guilt that wore my sister's voice, the silence that nearly swallowed me, and then the sentence that anchored the entire room. Blood doesn't make you safe. History doesn't make you obligated. I let the words land. No explanation. No softening. When I stepped down, people didn't clap right away. They stood, quiet, respectful. A few were crying. One woman touched my arm as I passed, whispering, "You spoke for all of us." That night, I drove home without music, just the hum of tires and the thrum of rain against the windshield. When I got home, I made tea, opened the back door, and let the night air settle around me. I had survived war. I had survived family. But now I was surviving something harder, my own life, on my terms. The court had done its part. Now it was my turn to rebuild. The court delivered justice, but healing was mine to finish alone. That truth echoed through the quiet moments that came afterward, not the ones during the trial, but the strange, open days that followed. The kind where people didn't know whether to ask how you were doing or avoid the topic altogether. When the damage was already done and there were no more facts to present, only silence to live in. The headlines faded within weeks. What had once been whispers around base housing, side glances at the PX, or half sentences exchanged in break rooms simply disappeared. The court had ruled. Dexter was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, stripped of any remaining military recognition, his name quietly removed from veteran rosters. No ceremony, no protest, just a quiet erasure. Isolde vanished from family events. From what I heard through secondhand mentions, she and Dexter divorced quietly. No messy proceedings, just signatures, boxes, and a moving truck that pulled away before dawn. She left town, maybe the state. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to know. What I did need to know, what I worked to reclaim, was myself. Most mornings, I returned to the base. My classroom became the place I could breathe again. Training young medics gave me a sense of structure, of worth. They didn't know my story, not most of them, and I preferred it that way. Let them learn from the curriculum, not from my scars, but I changed how I taught. I added a few new sections, lessons about handling high-pressure situations not just on the battlefield, but at home. I started incorporating psychological response strategies, adding guest speakers from the behavioral health unit. One cadet asked if we were broadening the course to include life after the uniform. I told him without flinching, "We'd be failing you if we didn't." Camber and I met for lunch every couple of weeks, just like we used to before everything went sideways. One afternoon at a diner tucked between a laundromat and a church, she asked me, "Do you feel lighter now?" I stirred cream into my coffee, thought for a second. "Not lighter, just less tangled." She raised her cup. "To lines in ink." We clinked glasses. A few days later, I received an envelope in my mailbox, not the legal kind, but an official invitation. A military-sponsored conference was being held in San Antonio. Resilience Boundaries in Military Families. There was a note at the bottom. We'd be honored to have you speak. I read it twice, set it down, walked away. Later that evening, I picked it up again and said yes. The auditorium was filled with uniforms and civilian clothes alike. Rows of polished shoes, notepads, faces trying not to show what they'd lived through. I stepped up to the microphone in full dress blues, not because I had to, but because I earned the right to stand there as myself. I'm not here to recount pain for sympathy, I began. I'm here because silence almost cost me everything. They listened, and I told them about the sister who watched, about the brother-in-law who hit, about the house that became a battlefield and the court that became a witness. But more than that, I talked about what no one teaches in boot camp. What to do when the harm comes from within the walls you're supposed to trust. I told them silence can feel like strength, until it breaks you. I ended with this. When someone uses your love as a leash, that isn't family, that's control. The room went still. Then, slowly, people began to rise. A standing ovation, not loud, not theatrical, just respectful, steady. Afterward, as I gathered my notes, a woman approached me, older than me, probably late 60s. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a navy cardigan with a gold pin that caught the light. She leaned in and said softly, "Your story sounded like mine. Thank you for not sugarcoating it." I looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you for surviving it." I drove home with the windows down. The spring air in Austin had finally turned warm without being heavy. On the way, I passed by a little flower shop I used to visit and pulled over, bought a small bundle of daisies, not for anyone else, just for my own table. Later that night, after dinner, I checked my inbox. Buried between confirmation emails and work updates, I found a message from Isolde. Just a few lines. "I hope you're doing well. I'm in therapy now. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know." I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. It stayed there, unread but not unseen. Some wounds don't need to be reopened, but they also don't need to be erased. On Sunday evening, I went for a walk, the kind where you don't measure distance, just time. The streets were quiet, the sun beginning its descent behind the rooftops. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel healed, but I felt steady. My body had mostly recovered. The bruises had faded, the hairline fracture in my cheek had mended. But the things that broke deeper, the trust, the memory, the illusion of safety and family, those were still under repair, and maybe always would be. I passed a small park, watched two sisters playing tag under the trees. One stumbled, and the other caught her hand before she fell. I smiled, not because it reminded me of anything I had, but because it reminded me of what was possible. When I got home, I made tea and opened the windows. The air carried no tension, no dread, just space. Justice gave me peace. But I gave myself freedom. Some wounds don't leave visible scars, but they change how we love, how we trust, and how we protect ourselves. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace or keeping yourself safe, you know exactly what this story feels like. So let me ask you, what would you do if the people who claim to love you crossed every line you drew? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, raw, real, and unforgettable, coming your way.
Hi, I'm Isolde. My sister uninvited me to her wedding. Said I wasn't really family. But that wasn't the worst part. Worse was how they still asked me to pay for the wedding. How they used a lullaby my mother sang just to make it theirs. How my dad told the neighbors I ruined it all, just to save face. They erased me with a smile, a soft tone, a polite exclusion that cut sharper than hate. And yet, they still expected my silence. What would you have done? I didn't expect anything special that Saturday afternoon. The sun filtered lazily through the curtains of my small apartment in Richmond, casting golden squares on the hardwood floor. I was curled up on the love seat, cradling my tea in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. The stillness, the quiet, it was comforting. For once, everything felt settled. At 30, I wasn't chasing dreams anymore. I had a decent career designing interiors for homes I couldn't afford to live in. I had two close friends who never asked too many questions, and I had carved out a version of peace where I didn't expect anything from the people who shared my blood, especially not my father's new family. Then, while scrolling through Instagram stories, a name popped up. Erin, my old college roommate. We hadn't talked in months, maybe a year, but she was still following some of the same people from my past. And there it was, her story playing on loop, a video of women laughing around a table, champagne flutes clinking, balloons spelling out, bride-to-be. In the middle of it, dressed in white lace and wearing a tiara, was my half-sister, Nadine. Text over the video read, "Bridal brunch with the bride-to-be # Nadine Voss wedding." I stared at the screen, thumb frozen above the phone. My heartbeat stuttered, just for a moment. A wedding? Her wedding? I hadn't received a call. No email, no, "Hey, just so you know." Nothing. Not even a forwarded invite that got lost in the mail. I locked my phone and set it face down on the coffee table. For a while I just sat there, my chest tightening like someone had laced invisible ropes around it and started to pull. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a party for someone else. Maybe... I opened the phone again and typed a message to Dad. "Hi, just saw something about Nadine's bridal shower. Is she getting married?" The message showed as delivered. No response. I waited an hour, then 2. By the time the sun dipped behind the line of rooftops across the street, my screen was still blank. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. That night, lying in bed with the lights off, I thought about every single dinner I had been left out of, every birthday I didn't know about until weeks later, every Sunday call that turned short the moment Marjorie's voice was heard in the background. And now, this. The next morning, I texted a former coworker, who happened to be distantly connected to Marjorie's circle. She replied within minutes. "Oh yeah, Nadine's getting married next month. Didn't you know? Thought everyone did." No, everyone didn't. I didn't. I could have left it there. I could have swallowed the bitterness like I always did and kept my head down. But something cracked. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something quieter, like disbelief turning into a slow burn. 3 days later, a text popped up. It was from Nadine. "Don't worry about the wedding. You're not invited. You're not really family, Isolde." I didn't breathe. I reread it 3 times. "You're not invited. You're not really family." I sat in silence. My tea had gone cold. The walls of my apartment felt tighter somehow, pressing in like I didn't belong in my own skin. How could someone say that like it was a weather update? Not a single sorry, not a question, just deletion. I stood up slowly and walked to my bookshelf. On the top was a photo frame, one I hadn't touched in years. My mother's face smiled back at me, that slight, knowing smile she always wore when she knew something I didn't. Her dark curls framed her soft eyes, the same eyes I carried in my own reflection. I whispered, "Did you see this coming, Mom?" My voice cracked at the end. I didn't cry, not yet, but I felt it, something hollowing out in my chest, like someone had scooped out everything soft and left behind something hard and brittle. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning back memories like flipping pages in a book I didn't want to finish. Nadine was 5 when Dad brought her and Marjorie into our house. I was 15 and numb from losing Mom barely a year before. Nadine used to crawl into my bed and beg for bedtime stories. I'd hold her until she fell asleep with her thumb still in her mouth. I bought her birthday presents with my babysitting money. I taught her how to braid her own hair. When she fell off her bike, it was me who sat on the curb and cleaned her scraped knees, while Dad looked for the nearest pharmacy. I remembered the way she used to whisper, "Sissy," and hug my waist like I was her whole world. And now, I was not family. I reached into the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old notebook, the one Mom used to write recipes in. It still smelled faintly like vanilla and cinnamon. Inside the front cover, she had written in cursive, "The family you build matters more than the one you're born into." Back then, I thought she meant the future, a husband, kids, a home of my own. Now I wondered if she meant survival, emotional survival. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling. Am I really that easy to erase? Maybe I was, Or maybe they were just too comfortable thinking I'd never say otherwise. The morning after Nadine's message, I didn't move for a long time. My phone lay face down on the kitchen counter, still vibrating occasionally from work notifications I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't sad, at least not in the way people expect. It was something else. Something that felt like acid under the skin, not enough to scream, just enough to make everything feel wrong. I went through the motions that week: shower, work, coffee, reply to emails, pretend to listen during design consultations, smile when the client asked, "Do you have siblings?" and feel that tiny sting behind the ribs as I said, "Yes, a half-sister." I didn't tell them we hadn't spoken properly in years. On Friday night, I was cleaning up dishes after a sad excuse for dinner when my phone rang. Not a text, not an email, a real call. The screen lit up with one name: Dad. I hesitated. Clive and I didn't talk much. Not since he married Marjorie. Not since I stopped pretending I was okay being a background character in their family highlight reel. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hi." He cleared his throat. "Hey, Izzy. How are you, sweetheart?" Sweetheart. That word hadn't passed his lips in a decade. I leaned against the counter. "I'm fine." There was a long pause, a clink of ceramic, maybe his coffee mug. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something. It's not about you and Nadine. I know there's tension, but this is bigger than that. It's about family." "Here we go." "What is it?" I asked. "Well," he exhaled, "Marjorie's been organizing everything for the wedding, and you know how expensive venues are these days. The florist needs a deposit. Nadine's dress, it's custom. And with your career doing so well, we thought maybe, if you could help out a little." I blinked, stunned, silent. "You're asking me to pay for a wedding I wasn't even invited to?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. "You're still family, Izzy. This is just one of those times family steps up." The laugh that came out of me was bitter, dry. "You mean like how you stepped up for me when Mom died? Or when you decided I didn't belong in your new family unit?" "Don't twist this," he said sharply. "It's about support, not revenge." My hand clenched tighter around the phone. "So I'm good enough to bankroll your daughter's big day, but not good enough to sit in the audience?" "She's emotional. You know how brides are." "Right. Emotional. Like that explained anything." "I'm going to stop you right there," I said, voice low. "If this is the kind of family I'm supposed to support, I think I'll pass." Before he could respond, I hung up. I stood in the silence of my apartment, still holding the phone. The rage didn't hit all at once. It slid in slow, deliberate, like ink bleeding into fabric. I put the phone down gently, afraid I'd throw it. Then it buzzed, a notification from Aaron with a caption, "Girl, check this out." Attached was a screenshot of a group chat. The title bar read, "Voss Wedding Core Inside," a series of messages. Marjorie. "We still need someone to cover the flower deposit. Ask Isolde. Don't bring up the invite thing, it'll just make it messy." Clive. "She'll probably say yes if we spin it like helping Nadine." Nadine. "Whatever. Just tell her it's about family. She'll bite." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my lungs burned. I read the messages twice, 3 times. Not one person said my name with affection. Not one message acknowledged that I might feel something. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't a daughter. I was a transaction. That was the word that echoed in my skull as I stood by the window. Transaction. Later that night, I pulled my journal from the nightstand drawer, the one Mom gave me for my 16th birthday. Most of the pages were blank, except for a few scribbled entries when I thought writing might save me from losing my mind. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "They want me for what I can give, not for who I am. I miss you, Mom. They don't even pretend anymore." I paused, pen hovering above the paper. "I think you knew this would happen. You always knew who they were. You just didn't want to say it out loud." I sat there with the pen still in hand long after I stopped writing. The room was dark now, the only light a soft glow from the street lamp outside. I didn't cry. Again. It wasn't about tears anymore. I felt removed, like I'd finally stepped outside the burning house and realized I never had to walk back in. But the cruelest thing wasn't what they asked. It was how normal they made it sound. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the last call. since I heard my father try to spin guilt into a favor and frame absence as love. The silence that followed was, strangely, easier than I expected. They didn't reach out again. No one did, not even Nadine. So I filled my time with client work, project proposals, coffee runs, and pretending I still wanted to engage with a world that didn't know the version of me that was unraveling under the surface. But the silence didn't last. Late one Friday afternoon, just after wrapping up a consultation with a couple remodeling their kitchen, I got a text from Aaron. "You're gonna want to see this." Attached was a live stream link from a mutual acquaintance, someone I hadn't seen or heard from since college. My thumb hovered over the link for a moment before I gave in. The video loaded with background chatter and elegant floral arrangements surrounding an outdoor patio strung with fairy lights. I saw tables dressed in soft pastels and a small group gathering by a makeshift dance floor. Someone in a tuxedo stepped forward, holding out his hand. It was my father. Then I saw her. Nadine in a white lace gown, smiling like every camera in the world was trained on her. She reached for his hand, and they stepped into position under the string lights. The music started, and my heart stopped. Moon River. That song didn't belong to her. It wasn't some wedding cliché or a romantic oldie picked off a playlist. It was ours. Mine and Mom's. The lullaby she'd hum every single night, even when she was too tired to finish a verse. It was the sound of warmth when the world was cruel, the melody that lived in the walls of my childhood bedroom long after she passed. I hadn't heard it in 15 years. I couldn't bring myself to, not once, until now. And here it was, floating out of speakers at a wedding I wasn't welcome at, the soundtrack to a moment I should have never seen. I didn't realize I had sat down, collapsed, onto the floor until my knee hit the edge of the coffee table. The live stream continued. Nadine spun slowly, leaning into our father like she had known that song all her life, like it had been hers. But it wasn't. I ended the stream and stared at the dark screen, my reflection twisted in the glossy surface. My stomach churned, cold and tight, as something dawned on me, something that felt like a slap across memory itself. I got up, walked over to my bookshelf, and pulled out the old binder that held scanned copies of Mom's things, recipes, poems, pages from her journals. I had kept them digital, knowing the originals were packed away somewhere I didn't have access to. Somewhere Marjorie had claimed as her territory years ago. Flipping through the PDF printouts, I reached the final page. The last entry, Mom's handwriting soft and cursive but fading slightly. If Nadine ever asks about this song, tell her it's not hers. This was our lullaby. A coldness settled into my spine. I hadn't read that note in so long, but now it pulsed like a siren in my chest. How did Nadine even know that song meant something? How did she know to pick that song for that dance? There was only one answer. Marjorie. She had the originals. She had access to Mom's personal journals. She must have given the song to Nadine. Or worse, planted the idea, knowing what it would do to me if I ever found out. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't some innocent mistake. It was deliberate, surgical. They didn't just cut me out of their lives. They reached into mine and pulled out a piece that still had Mom's fingerprints on it and twisted it into a stage prop. I sat still for a long time. No tears came. There was no room for them. I felt stripped of something I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to. This wasn't about invitations anymore. This wasn't about brunches or bridal showers or polite exclusions. This was memory theft, emotional vandalism. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. This was the last line. You just crossed it. I stood up slowly, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, too steady. I brought my laptop to the table, opened a new document, and started typing. Not an email, not a rant, just a list. A list of every time they blurred the boundary between family and fraud. Every manipulation, every dig disguised as care, every omission framed as keeping the peace. For the first time in years, I started writing down what I'd do if they ever pushed again. The next morning, my list still sat open on the laptop screen, the cursor blinking patiently at the end of the last line. I hadn't added anything new since midnight, but I couldn't bring myself to close it either. Somehow, just having it there, a living document of every invisible bruise, felt like armor. Then my inbox pinged. The subject line read, "Regarding your possible presence." It was from Marjorie. Not "Dear Isolde" or "We'd love to have you there." Just those 4 words, clinical and cold. I clicked. "If you do insist on attending, please coordinate your outfit accordingly. We suggest beige, champagne, or dusty blue. It's Nadine's day, and she's asked that there be no visual distractions. Thank you." No invitation. No RSVP link. Just wardrobe instructions, as if I were a background extra in a production I never auditioned for. I actually laughed. Loud, sharp, empty. Not out of humor, but because the absurdity of it all had finally tipped over into something surreal. They hadn't asked if I was coming. They hadn't said I was welcome. But if I did show up, I was to wear something that made sure I faded into the wallpaper. Later that evening, I called Dad. His voice picked up after 3 rings. "Isolde? I got an email from Marjorie." A pause. "Ah, right. Well, she wanted to give you a heads up, just in case you were thinking of coming." "Just in case," I repeated flatly. "Okay, so where would I be seated then?" He cleared his throat. "It's a tight arrangement this year. The family section's already full, but we could get you a nice spot near the back. Still good view of the stage and not near family, though." "Well," he trailed off, "Nadine was really particular about the seating. You know how brides are." There it was again, that infuriating phrase, as if emotional manipulation became acceptable the moment you strapped on a veil. "I see," I said. "So let me get this straight. I'm not invited, but I'm allowed to show up as long as I wear the right color, sit far enough away, and don't ruin the aesthetic?" "It's not about that. It's about avoiding drama. We want to keep things peaceful." Peaceful. I could almost feel the irony dripping through the speaker. "I'm sure you do," I said, and hung up. I didn't feel peace. I felt fire building behind my ribs. 2 days later, Erin forwarded me a message she'd gotten from one of her old styling contacts. Someone hired for Nadine's wedding. A forwarded screenshot. I braced myself. "For Isolde's look, please avoid white, red, or anything with embellishment. Nothing that might outshine the bride. She should look appropriately reserved. Understated?" Understated. That was the word they used. I wasn't even on the guest list, yet they had already assigned me a visual perimeter. Be neutral, be quiet, be invisible. I replied to Erin, not even invited, but still expected to look invisible. She texted back, "This is next level unhinged." Later that night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror holding a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was deep burgundy, the color of old wine and unsaid things. Mom had worn it to her last wedding anniversary dinner with Dad. After she passed, I kept it wrapped in tissue paper, tucked away in a box like it might vanish if exposed to air too long. I slipped it on. It fit a little tighter around the waist. The shoulders sat sharper than I remembered, but it made me feel something I hadn't in months, rooted. I studied myself in the reflection, brushing a hand over the velvet curve of the dress. "If they wanted quiet," I said aloud, "they should have treated me like I mattered." And just like that, the countdown began, not to their wedding, but to my reckoning. A week passed. I didn't reply to Marjorie's dress code suggestion, and I hadn't spoken to Clive since that shallow conversation about seating. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd take the hint and leave me alone. They didn't. The message came on a Tuesday morning, sandwiched between work emails and a reminder about my dental appointment. It was from Nadine. "Hey, we're still short on funds for the honeymoon. Can you help?" No greeting, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the ghost she made me into. I stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, as if the words might shift into something rational if I just gave them time. But they didn't. They stayed as they were, clean, transactional, dismissive. I typed, then paused, deleted, then finally wrote, "Depends. Am I still not invited?" The typing bubbles appeared instantly. "This isn't about that. It's about family helping family." That word again, family. I didn't answer. By mid-afternoon, she sent a Google spreadsheet labeled honeymoon budget. Line items included 5-star resort in the Maldives, spa package, private villa, business class tickets, luxury cruise extension, estimated cost, north of $14,000. No thank you. No, this means the world to us. just a polished list of entitlement. I scrolled through the spreadsheet, deadpan. A part of me wondered if she'd even considered how absurd it looked, asking the sister she publicly disowned to finance her tropical escape. I typed again. So, I'm good enough to fund your future, but not worthy of being part of your present? Her response came back almost immediately, like she'd been rehearsing it. It's not personal, Isolde. It's about what feels right. You and I, we're just different people now, but this is still family stuff. I reread that line 3 times. Not personal. The irony was bitter enough to taste. That night, I curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, trying to pretend my blood hadn't just turned colder. Erin texted me around 10, her message filled with nothing but a shocked emoji and a link to an Instagram story. I clicked. It was Nadine. Mid-conversation at what looked like a backyard wine night with her friends. Music playing low in the background. She held a drink, laughing. No, seriously, she has no kids, no husband, no real life. Her money's like the only thing she's got. I figured she might as well use it for something fun. The girls around her laughed. One of them even added, "Better than letting it sit in a bank, right?" And then they clinked glasses like it was some kind of joke only privileged hearts could understand. I sat still. Not angry, not surprised. Just hollow. I didn't replay the video. I didn't show Erin my reaction. I just closed the app and stared at the ceiling. There are moments where grief stops being dramatic, stops being about sobbing or yelling or pacing in circles, and instead becomes this low, constant buzz under your skin, like you're mourning someone who died and is still walking around. That's what it felt like with Nadine. I wasn't losing her now. I had already lost her, and maybe she was never mine to begin with. The next morning I sent one final message. The answer is no. You said I'm not family, remember? And then, for the first time, I blocked her number. It felt anticlimactic at first, just a silent click, and she was gone from my inbox. But something shifted after that. It was the first time I'd ever drawn a real line, not hinted, not retreated quietly, not swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. A full, unapologetic, deliberate no. For once I wasn't trying to make things better. I was protecting what was left of me. But drawing lines in the sand only works until someone dares to cross it. The morning after I blocked Nadine, I made a single phone call. It was to the event coordinator I had originally spoken to months ago, when Clive and Marjorie casually mentioned they were short on funds, and I, like a fool, offered to help. The woman answered on the second ring. "This is Lindsay, with Magnolia Events." "This is Isolde Rayner," I said, calm and level. "I need to withdraw payment under Contract Clause 5B. There was a brief silence on the line, then a rustle of paper. "You're the primary payer for the Voss wedding, correct?" "That's right." "Which portion are you looking to cancel?" "All of it," I replied. "The venue deposit, the catering, the cake, the floral arrangements. Everything covered under my payment authorization." She hesitated. "We're 6 days from the event. I'll need a written confirmation. You'll have it by noon." And she did. I drafted the email with the same clarity I used when designing project proposals. Concise, professional, irrevocable. By noon, all funds were frozen. A single sentence at the bottom of the email sealed it. "Please note this decision is final and non-negotiable." I didn't wait for a response. I simply closed my laptop, made myself a sandwich, and went back to work. Saturday morning. The wedding was supposed to start at noon. The weather was perfect. Blue skies, soft breeze, the kind of day photographers pray for. But the venue was chaos. Erin sent me a voice memo from across town. "Girl, you will not believe what's happening right now. No food showed up. The cake never came. They were scrambling to find folding tables and Costco sandwiches an hour before guests arrived." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. She added, "Marjorie is losing it, screaming at the staff like they stole her purse. Nadine's crying in the bridal suite, and Clive keeps calling you. He's called me twice already." I didn't respond. An hour later, Erin forwarded me a screenshot of a group chat that included one of her cousins, someone who worked at the venue. Nadine slapped her mom, screamed something about sabotage, then threw a champagne flute at the wall. Below it, a second message. She's threatening to sue her own sister, loudly. I turned off notifications and went back to sketching out a shelving concept for a client's home office. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they scrambled to salvage a wedding built on entitlement, I was building something functional for someone who'd actually asked for help. Later that evening, I walked into the local cafe for my usual chai latte. It was quiet, just a couple of tables filled, and I recognized the barista, Jamie. She smiled at me. But just as I was about to place my order, a woman I didn't know turned from the sugar counter and raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who ruined your sister's wedding, right?" she asked, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "She said you pulled the plug on everything, just because she didn't give you a front row seat. That's dramatic." I tilted my head, offering a tight smile. "You mean the sister who told me I wasn't family? That sister?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't respond. I took my chai and walked out without another word. The stories spread like wildfire. Marjorie had already spun her version to the neighbors and the church ladies. Isolde, the bitter spinster, lashing out because she wasn't center stage. I knew how they'd frame it. Jealous, emotional, unstable. It was easier than admitting they'd built their castle on borrowed bricks, and I'd simply taken mine back. I didn't defend myself. Not online, not in person. I didn't call Clive. I didn't reply to the voicemail from Aunt Lydia. I didn't even read the email from Nadine's college roommate asking me to think of the bigger picture. No more explaining, no more context. I was done being everyone's footnote. That Sunday, I took a long walk down Monument Avenue. It was quiet, golden with spring light. I passed families taking graduation photos, runners pacing themselves for the 10K, and a little girl in a white dress chasing a bubble wand. For the first time in weeks, I felt unburdened. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel shame. I felt power, not the kind that screams to be heard, the kind that simply knows. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to make room for people who would never make room for me. That part of the story was over. But predators don't stay quiet when prey learns to bite back. 2 days after the wedding imploded, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Not texts this time. A call. My father's name glowed across the screen like a bad omen. I stared at it for a moment before I picked up. No, good morning. No, are you okay? Just his voice. Dry, measured, and already defensive. "You've humiliated us, Isolde." I blinked at the ceiling, still in bed. "Excuse me? You could have said no in a better way. You didn't have to sabotage everything." I sat up slowly. "You mean by pulling back money I was never thanked for in the first place?" His tone didn't soften. "It's not just about money. It's about what it symbolized. And now, look what you've done." "Look what I've done?" I repeated. There was a pause like he expected me to apologize. "Maybe," he continued. "You can help make it right by covering Nadine's college tuition. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's the least you could do." I nearly laughed, but it came out like a dry breath. "Least for who?" He cleared his throat. "We're still a family, Isolde. At the end of the day, blood matters." "Except mine," I said, and hung up. That afternoon, Aaron sent me a link with no caption. Just a link. I tapped it. It led to a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Nadine Recover from Her Ruined Wedding, A Sister's Betrayal." At the top was a photo of Nadine, eyes red, face tilted toward her bouquet like a Greek tragedy mask. The description below made my stomach knot. Nadine has always been a kind, generous soul. Her wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, until her older sister Isolde pulled financial support out of jealousy and left the family in ruins. Isolde was like a second mother to her growing up. But sometimes, jealousy destroys love. I stared at the screen. No, this wasn't real. And yet, there it was, a public crucifixion in pastel fonts. I scrolled further. A list of donations, names I recognized from childhood, neighbors, relatives, co-workers of Marjorie's. Below the donation tally, comments. "So sorry this happened to you, Nadine." "Isolde used to be sweet. What changed?" "Tragic family betrayal." I sat still for several minutes. Then the notification buzzed again. A screenshot from Aaron. A Facebook post shared by Aunt Lillian. Some wounds cut deepest when they come from within the family. Please support Nadine. I closed the phone. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't cry. I just looked at myself, looked through myself. Mom once told me, "You don't have to be in pain to prove you belong." I'd spent years mistaking pain for loyalty. I opened my laptop, stared at a blank email draft. For a second, I typed, "You have no idea what you're enabling." Then I deleted it. Instead, I opened a new email, and one by one, I typed out short, direct messages to each person who had shared that GoFundMe post. To Aunt Lillian, to Uncle Brent, to Rhonda from across the street, each message read the same. "You know me better than that. Or maybe you never did." I didn't wait for replies. The next morning, I walked to the corner bookstore and bought myself a new notebook. Hardcover, linen blue, clean slate. When the cashier handed me my change, she smiled and said, "This one's sturdy. Good for beginnings." I nodded. That's the point. At home, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, life went on, dogs pulling leashes, teens filming TikToks, an older couple arguing about where they parked. And I sat with my new notebook. No rage, no revenge, just a line in ink. I do not need to prove what they refused to see. I wasn't at war anymore. I was just not participating, and that felt louder than anything I could have said. But silence wasn't surrender. It was a storm gathering in still air. The air had turned, but it wasn't spring anymore. It was something sharper, thinner. A week after the GoFundMe post, just when the noise seemed to fade, it returned in a different form. Nadine uploaded a carousel of wedding photos to her Instagram. The first image, her in the white dress, beaming beside Clive. The second, a wide-angle shot of the reception with soft lighting, floral arches and champagne flutes raised in frozen toasts. The last, a black-and-white shot of her twirling mid-dance, hair loose, eyes closed like she was the only person in the world who had ever felt joy. The caption read, "Surrounded by love, only true family made it. No drama, just bloodline." Subtle? Maybe to strangers. To me, it was a blade under velvet. My phone pinged twice, first from Erin. "Did you see her latest post? I think this was for you." Second, a screenshot from my coworker Jenna. Was that shade? Or am I reading into it? I didn't answer either. I just saved the image. And I sat there for a long time, staring at the final photo, at the way Nadine's head tilted back in perfect elation, as if I had never existed. Later that night, after dinner and dishes and 30 quiet minutes watching a nature documentary with the volume low, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number, no name. The message was short. "You still don't get it. You were never one of us. Keep your money. Keep your pity." No punctuation, no emotion, just poison pretending to be truth. I stared at the words while sitting cross-legged on my living room floor. The only light came from the floor lamp beside the couch, casting long shadows across the rug. In one hand, I held my phone. In the other, a framed photo of Mom, her smile permanent. The corners of her mouth turned like she knew something the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I laughed, a short, cold laugh that surprised even me. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't rage. It was the sound of someone finally done playing a rigged game. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened the folder labeled College Fund. It had been sitting there for months. Inside, scanned documents, bank approvals, draft transfers. Nadine's name on all of it. I selected the folder, right-clicked, delete. When prompted to confirm, I didn't blink. Then I opened my email and typed 3 lines to Clive. "There will be no tuition from me. You called me family when it was convenient. You made me stranger when it wasn't." I didn't wait for his reply. I blocked his number. Then I blocked Marjorie. Then Nadine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt intact, like each step was a brick being set into place, building the wall that should have always existed between me and their version of family. The next morning, I woke early. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I packed a single suitcase, nothing excessive. Just what I needed to feel like myself somewhere else. I locked the apartment, dropped the key into the mailbox downstairs, and ordered a car to the airport. No final glance back. No dramatic music swelling in the background. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt more free than I had in years. At the gate, I bought a paperback and a bottle of water. The woman behind me in line complimented my scarf. I said thank you and smiled. I didn't mention where I was going. I didn't feel the need to explain why I was leaving. Closure isn't a place, it's a decision. And I had made mine. No more proving, no more begging, no more contorting myself into someone who fit their mold of family. The flight attendant called my boarding group. I rose, gripped the handle of my suitcase, and stepped forward. The sky beyond the windows looked overcast, soft and heavy like a held breath. I exhaled. Maybe the wound wouldn't ever fully close. Maybe there would always be a mark where it used to burn. But I wouldn't keep scratching it open just to feel something. That was the difference now. I didn't need the pain to remind me who I was. I already knew. But even freedom comes with a shadow. And sometimes it still speaks in your mother's voice. 1 month later. The rain in Portland had a different rhythm. Less dramatic than Virginia storms, but steadier. Like it knew it had nothing left to prove. I'd been here 3 weeks. A quiet sublet near Alberta Street. The kind of place where people left handwritten signs on their fences that read, "Please take one," over baskets of lemons, used books, or thrifted mugs. I took a ceramics class on Thursdays. Nothing fancy, just clay under my fingernails and a wheel that spun until my thoughts caught up to my hands. Sometimes my pieces collapsed, the walls too thin. Other times they held. I liked that I didn't need everything to stand up perfectly. I started waking early, making coffee before the sun rose. There were no unread messages waiting, no phantom vibrations, no dread when my screen lit up, just a life, uncomplicated and my own. I hung a small piece of fired clay on the front door last weekend. I'd carved 2 words into it with a kitchen knife. I'm enough. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a declaration. It felt like a fact. Erin called me from back home a few days later. She never asked how I was, she just jumped right in. "You're not going to believe this," she said, "but Nadine's asking Clive and Marjorie to sell their Lexus." I blinked. What for? She burned through the rest of the wedding cash, wants to go back to grad school, says the family owes her one. I leaned against the kitchen counter, pressing the cold ceramic mug to my chest. And? They said no, Erin replied with a short laugh. Marjorie told her, "We gave you a wedding, not a lifetime subscription." Nadine lost it, called them selfish, ungrateful, accused Clive of emotionally abandoning her. I didn't say anything. "There's more," she continued. "Someone flagged their GoFundMe, the post's down. Apparently a few neighbors finally spoke up, said it felt shady, like manipulation." I walked to the window, watching a bus pull up at the corner. A teenager climbed off with a giant cello case, struggling to keep it upright. A man in a puffer vest helped her without a word. "The house is quiet now," Erin said softly. "No more strategy meetings, no more group chats, just silence. Clive hasn't mentioned your name in a week." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. It felt like a curtain had closed, not in triumph, but in quiet resignation. I thanked her and hung up. On Saturday, I flew back for 1 day, not to visit anyone. I brought a small envelope in my carry-on. Inside was a printed copy of a scholarship form, the same form I'd once filled out with Nadine's name, the one I never submitted. I took a cab from the airport straight to the cemetery. Mom's grave sat between 2 birch trees. Someone had placed a sunflower bouquet there recently. Not from me, maybe some neighbor, maybe no one at all. I crouched down and laid the envelope beneath the vase. Then I took out a sprig of dried lavender I'd kept in my bag and rested it across the stone. "I didn't fix them," I whispered, "but I didn't become them either." And somehow, that felt like the answer she would have wanted. I didn't stay long. Back in Portland that evening, I walked to the corner cafe for tea. The barista recognized me now, always called me Early Bird. The seat by the window was empty, the light warm against the wood-grain table. I pulled out my notebook and flipped past the old pages. Some filled with lists, others just fragments. I didn't need to write today, I just sat. The stillness didn't feel hollow anymore. The next morning, an email popped into my inbox. A local high school invited me to speak at a community session about resilience and selfhood in complex families. I read the message twice, then once more, and then I smiled. Yes, I thought. That I can talk about. Not to point fingers, not to drag names through the dirt, but because maybe somewhere there was a kid sitting in their room wondering if love was something they had to earn. And maybe I could tell them, you are already enough. You are already whole. You don't have to bleed to be seen. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about knowing who you are after everything tries to tell you you're not enough. Looking back now, I don't regret walking away. I used to think love had to look a certain way. Shared blood, last names, matching smiles at dinner tables. But family is who shows up when you're broken, not who breaks you and calls it discipline. I learned the hard way that sometimes peace doesn't come from making things right. It comes from choosing yourself when no one else will. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, let me tell you this. You are not the problem. You are not too much. You are not a burden. You are someone who survived a version of love that tried to make you small. And now, it's your turn to build the version of family that sees you fully and stays. So, what about you? Have you ever had to walk away from people who claim to love you, just to finally breathe? Do you believe family is earned through action, not just blood? Let me know in the comments. If this story spoke to something in you, type 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if it didn't hit home, tell me why. I want to understand your side too. This space is for all of us. And if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, real, and from the heart, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll never miss what's coming next. Because the truth is, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just finally say, I deserve better. Thanks for watching. I see you, I hear you, and I hope you never forget, you're not alone.